Michael, thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation about what you guys have been working on. Kolme seems to be a pretty big deal, but before we get into it, tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. My name is Michael Snorman. I'm the VP of Software at FP Block. I've been here for 15 years. We've been here long before the blockchain space. We've grown into the blockchain space. We have a long experience using top-of-the-line languages. Previously Haskell, we're very heavy in Rust these days, doing backend development, server-side development, DevOps, scientific computing, regulated industries, and fintech. And all of these things have really led us into being in the blockchain space. We've been very active here for about the past 8 years, and we've been focused hardcore on building dApps for the past 5 years. That experience building dApps on a number of different chains, that's shown us quite a few of the strengths and quite a few of the limitations of being in the blockchain world. Kolme is our answer to how could we be building blockchain applications that are easier to get to market, more secure, more featureful, more performant.
All right, you got to break down what Kolme is, though, because you're talking about making it easier to bring these things to market. Are we talking about having you bring all these things to market, or are you empowering others to bring them to market?
Well, the way I'm answering it is we're going to bring it to market. But here, if I'll give the full answer. So Kolme is a blockchain framework we've been putting together. It is a library written in Rust for Rust-powered applications. It's fully open sourced. It's available on GitHub, fpco/Kolme, fully documented, and it's currently running live production mainnet applications. The point of Kolme is to allow you to easily, safely, securely create an application that runs with its own dedicated proprietary chain, not connected to any existing chains, not dependent on those histories, with very strong bridging and connection capabilities to existing chains, which are able to act as the funding sources and destinations, essentially working as payment on-ramp and off-rampers. By keeping the full logic inside your chain, you're able to bypass issues like congestion, gas costs. You're able to have reproducible builds, reproducible output, transparency, verifiability of your chain, but you also get a lot of benefits. You're able to pull in off-chain data without any kind of concern about needing an Oracle solution. You're able to do that kind of execution from inside your transactions. You're able to bypass a lot of this typical limitations that you run into on a chain, like gas limits and storage limits. Essentially, what we're giving you is the ability with a Web 2 style of development to still keep all the transparency and power of being in the Web 3 world.
All right, you gave me a lot to work with, and I love that. All right, you mentioned no oracles needed. Are we talking about not needing platforms like Link anymore and things of that nature?
So to some extent, the answer is yes. On the other hand, the answer would be we love to continue working with Link. So let me break down what's going on with oracles. Oracles are a very good solution to a problem. The problem is that when you're running a blockchain application, you can't pull in data from the outside world. Everything has to already exist on the blockchain that you're talking to. This is the standard form of blockchain development. This makes a lot of sense. It fits in with the standard blockchain model, but it introduces a very awkward kind of setup. We've now worked on at least 4 or 5 different dApps, all of them running into the same kind of issue of we want to perform an action, but we need data from off-chain in order to populate the oracle, which will only happen after this transaction is finished. Sometimes this is called deferred execution or 2 steps. Without these kinds of 2-step approaches, a lot of the time you can be open to some kind of a congestion attack, DDoS attack on nodes, other things along those lines. What we're trying to approach here is allowing the application itself to pull in data from off-chain. When I say off-chain, it means off of the currently running chain, the Kolme chain in our case. Now, you can still pull in data from Link. There are some great things that have happened as a result of Oracle solutions existing. Chainlink, Pyth, other kinds of service providers, they're providing cryptographically secured pieces of data, giving you proof of off-chain data or general purpose data in the world. The fact that we're able to verify that data with a cryptographic cryptographic signature, that plays in very nicely with Kolme. What Kolme is allowing you to do is continue to work with those kinds of data providers, even if they're not on the chain that you're currently running on. And in addition to that, you can pull in any kind of arbitrary data from off-chain. So if you wanted to, you could write an application that's based off of, say, a random number generator from a standard web API. or you could be using some kind of sports betting results that are coming in from some kind of external data source. Those are the kinds of things you can do with standard blockchain development, but you always end up having to implement some version of an oracle. Oftentimes these oracles that you end up implementing are not particularly secure. We've seen this happen quite a few times in dApp development.
All right. The next piece you covered was in regards to gas limits. What do you mean by gas limits? Are we talking about the price of gas fees? Are we talking about how many transactions can actually get through at any given time? What does that look like?
Really good question. So when you do smart contract development, you have to make sure that a number of different things are broken down into bite-sized chunks so that the chain is able to execute it. The reason for this is that most blockchain, in fact, all standard blockchains, when they're executing a smart contract, they're executing it in a virtualized environment for security. We have to make sure that we don't blow past any kinds of CPU limits. The machine, the virtual machine, the virtual blockchain machine is a shared resource, and we can't necessarily trust everyone who's running there. This is where the Oracle issue comes from. You can't make outgoing requests because you can't necessarily trust that code. But in addition to that, we also have quite a few limits around how much data storage you're able to perform. And specifically to your question, when it comes to gas, what I am talking about is the CPU limits. It depends chain by chain. But for example, just in the Cosmos ecosystem, for instance, your gas is built based off of not just the CPU time that you spend, but also based off of data storage and data loads. So putting all those different pieces together, you have hard limits on how much processing you're able to do in a single transaction. The way that we end up solving that in most blockchains is breaking this up, creating some kind of batch job, which is able to do little bits of work here and there, moving a whole bunch of the processing that you would like to really keep in one standard centralized location, breaking up that processing between an on-chain smart contract and an off-chain service that doesn't have the same kind of limitations. With Kolme, we don't have any of those limitations. Obviously, there are concerns. If you write an application that simply takes 20 minutes to run a transaction, you're not going to have a very fast application. That's going to be a problem. But you do have all the flexibility you want to perform as much processing as you would like in each individual block. So we're basically removing artificial limitations that normally exist in dApps.
Got it. All right. So where does the storage piece come in? Because that is something that I think there's probably a dozen companies out there trying to solve for, and you're talking about it as if it wasn't a big deal.
One of the reasons why it's not such a big deal to deal with storage is because we're dealing with app-specific chains. Most of the time when we're talking about a blockchain, we're talking about a blockchain storing the full transaction history, the full state, whatever the case is, whatever kind of data storage we're talking about, of an entire blockchain, which is supporting hundreds or thousands of different dApps on top of native chain operations. Now we're talking about a much simpler problem to solve. And the way that, the analogy that I give going back to the Web 2 world, we've spun up many applications in the past in Web 2. Go to AWS, set up all your systems, deploy. It would be crazy to spin up a single SQL database and use that same SQL database for 15 different applications across 10 different companies. No one would do that. Everyone would have their own SQL database. It's only in this blockchain world where we've gone ahead, and for very good reasons. We can all talk about the reasons why we ended up in this place. But now we have a situation where we have to share storage, share CPU, share execution across lots of different people who really don't trust each other. Just using cloud environments as an example, we solved these problems quite a while ago when it came to data storage. Don't put everything into the same database. Now, you could absolutely have a single application which is going to bump up against new storage limits and new problems. But the two things to keep in mind: one, we're dealing with a smaller problem because it's one application at a time. And two, given the fact that we no longer have the same kind of trust model of different people who are in competition with each other, who can't trust each other, now we're talking about an application that is written, vetted, and then run by a set of people who are looking at the code that they're actually going to be running.
All right. So you just brought up a big thing in crypto that people don't think about. Essentially, we talk about security. Like, it's fine. Everybody has their own private keys. No one is going to be able to read or write things that they shouldn't be able to. But nobody ever talks about the resources aspect of it. Like, you're still dealing with shared resources, and that hinders people when they're, doing things like you just said, basic transactions even. But especially when you're dealing with full applications on chain, you're actually having to compete against others, maybe for the storage, maybe for the transaction numbers, or how fast things are actually going through. If we don't have to compete with one another for these things, where does that leave our existing infrastructure of like, all right, I'm going to buy more of this token because more people using it means number goes up? Does that mean that that's irrelevant now?
In the Kolme world, it is. In the Kolme world, we're not talking about incentivizing things based off of token prices, not in the same way. There are absolutely, token prices, tokens in general have plenty of overlap, but as far as being, being a supply, being an asset like oil, which has intrinsic value and we're using it for the intrinsic value, and that's the driver of demand, we're no longer talking about that.
Got it. So when you're talking about competition amongst the players in the market, you're dealing with who does it better versus how many people do you have running something on your platform instead.
Yes, and when you say who did it better, the thing that I love is this is really getting back to the product itself, the application itself is taking the forefront. It's no longer a question of, oh, is it incentivizing the token that I happen to be holding at this time? We can really get back to focusing on the idea of delivering value through the application, not just through some kind of incentive mechanism through associated tokens.
Right now, people are usually competing and deploying based on liquidity and going, I want to go on this chain versus that chain simply because of who else is already on there. If people are doing now standalone chains and are able to actually, be recognized by the quality of their applications, how does that change the landscape of crypto that we see today?
That's a great question. Liquidity is already a different topic. It's very much related, but it's another piece of the puzzle. Liquidity really comes down to what kind of applications are we going to be building, and there's no secret that crypto has been dominated quite a bit recently for the past number of years by DeFi, and so it makes sense to bring up liquidity as one of the first things to be looking at. And I agree. I think that one of the things that really has driven the choice of chains, and I've seen this in discussions with product companies, discussions with other dev teams, really low down on the list is quality of the chain. Very high on the list is, as you say, liquidity, user base, other topics along those lines. With Kolme, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it as easy and trivial as possible to make your application bridged to whichever chain you want it to be bridged to. So for example, USDC is becoming king in many of these DeFi ecosystems, and it's very easily fungible between the different chains, right? It's very easy with cross-chain transfer protocol to be able to move it between different chains. So imagine having your Kolme application and getting it to be multi-chain out of the box. You can connect it to multiple different chains, all of them supporting the same USDC token. You can now bring it in. Suddenly where was my liquidity in the first place doesn't matter nearly as much as it used to in the past. So I do see that as a pretty big part of the shakeup, and hopefully getting away from a little bit of this monopolization that's going on, this consolidation of power, let people actually make the decision based off of which chain, which wallet, which tokens, and ultimately which applications they prefer the most.
Where do you guys live? Are we talking about having to bridge every asset and having to deal with wait times of other chains? Or is there some type of chain abstraction here that allows people to operate and not worry where they're actually transacting or processing some of these things?
Cool. So so the way that the assets work, anytime Kolme is connected to a chain, we set up a bridge contract on that chain for that specific application. Bridging funds into Kolme is as simple as performing an on-chain transaction. So for that, yes, the bridging of funds, the onboarding of funds into Kolme, absolutely, you have to wait for a sidechain transaction. The Kolme framework itself is built off of something we call Triadic security. And Triadic security means that there are three groups of validators. There's listeners, the processor, and approvers. The listeners are the ones that watch those external chains, wait for those events to take place, the bridging of funds, updating keys, a few other minor bookkeeping activities that can take place on external chains for security and fund purposes. And then they observe those changes and they send that message to the Kolme chain itself. Once you're in the Kolme chain, those funds are now loaded up and you can interact with them however you want without any need to go back to the original chain. So I can place a bet, I could open a position, I could transfer the funds to somebody else, or I could withdraw them, and I could send them to to another wallet, maybe on a different chain, even. That is where the approvers come in, by the way. That's the third piece of the puzzle. The processor is the one that actually does the processing of blocks and produces blocks. The approvers are another set. They're the ones who go through the blockchain history, confirm that the history is clean, safe, correct, and then sign off on any kind of fund transfers on at the limit. This allows us to keep all of the processing very fast at the processor layer. It does not tie us down to any of the block times or any other kind of limitations coming from other chains. If another chain goes down, we're able to continue processing ourselves without needing to wait for them. And then once that chain comes back up, then any kind of pending fund transfers coming in or out will be processed once the chain is able to begin processing again.
All right, very, very cool. Who's actually running these three validator types, the listeners, the processors, and the approvers? Is that the person who deploys their chain? Does this go back to you guys who are, building the infrastructure? How does that function?
This would be a standard, the set of rules of who's going to be running the validators. This one we actually fall in line with most other blockchains. So for example, if you wanted to, you could run all the different validators yourself on one machine and be done. I do that all the time for testing purposes. There's, obviously in testing, no one's worried about losing any money. So for testing purposes, that makes perfect sense. And if you had some kind of a minor application, for example, the demo I'm going to be showing in Vegas next month, that's the way that we're going to be running it in that case. For something that's a little bit more, something that you want a little bit more security on, it obviously makes sense to begin separating it out so that there are multiple validators. Just to spell it out, the limitation, if you have one validator running all of the validator set, it means that person controls the entirety of the blockchain. They can perform any actions that they want. And essentially, you're back to the Web 2 world plus transparency. You get some kind of guarantee. You get plenty of transparency in the blockchain. That's not going to go away, but there's centralized control completely. Once you're at the point of, I want to have some kind of security, then it becomes a question of who is it that I want to trust? FP Block, absolutely. We work with our customers to run these, to run validators. We also work with external partners who are able to run validators on their own machines so that there's a complete, not just a theoretical wall between two different pieces of DevOps. We actually have completely different teams, and our team has no access to the private keys necessary in order to move funds. So by having that kind of a separation, you get back the guarantees that you're really looking for in a blockchain.
I love it. So essentially, you're putting this in the hands of whoever deploys it, saying, hey, if you want to use us as a validator, we're here. We want to support you. But if you want to run it on your own and figure out how this thing goes, that's also up to you as well. Essentially giving the power back to the deployer itself.
Yep. And one of the things we've really tried to do, as I mentioned, we have a very long history in the Web 2 space and a lot of DevOps experience. We've really tried to make this as easy to host as possible, following DevOps best practices, following high availability practices, shared storage, all of the standard ways that we like to deploy Web 2 services. We've tried to bring that over to Kolme and Web 3 and make it much easier to run this on standard kinds. If you like container hosting, we happen to be big fans of container hosting. Container hosting is natively supported. If you want to go bare metal and you want to be running this thing directly, any kind of setup, very straightforward to get set up with.
All right. So if we're going to compare what you guys have put together to your AWS, security of it is actually where it's supposed to be, because that is my biggest pet peeve with, dealing with AWS, is that I would, let's set up a new environment, and then it's an hour and a half before I can actually get anything done because I'm just clicking away and setting up different security parameters.
Yeah. So, the way that we like to get things set up with our AWS accounts, we typically use Terraform. We have over many years, we've put together quite a few Terraform scripts that get a standard environment set up. Kolme, for example, I believe we've done some tests deploying with Kubernetes. We've also deployed it with Docker Swarm and deployed it with AWS ECS on Fargate. So as far as those kinds of setups, using standard technology, standard tools, and for the most part, standard security parameters is the right kind of setup here.
Love it. So it's not going to take me a whole day just setting up the infrastructure behind it for me to actually try to use what you guys have put together.
Correct. That's the goal. And beyond that, if you really, if you want to just get up and running quickly, and I've done this myself, spin up a machine. You can just run the executable, open some ports, and you can get started. The execution the execution approach. It's all fairly straightforward, following standard DevOps best practices. Mm-hmm. For anyone who's old enough to remember it, we follow 12-factor app recommendations. So if you're curious about the way config is done, that's where a lot of the inspiration for our DevOps style comes from.
We also have that tool, Zahoot, that we use for configuration in the AWS space too, that we built several years ago to help with this.
Yeah, we had quite a few issues with AWS IAM. We saw those issues pop up with a lot of our customers, and IAM has now gotten better with SSO, which is now called IAM Identity Center, if I remember correctly. I find it difficult to stay up to speed with all the different names. Zahoot is a different approach that we've taken. We find it much more convenient for doing login both on the web interface and, more importantly, for being able to get local credentials without having to wait through the long AWS SSO login process. Also ties in our case, where we have it tied into our identity provider, so Azure AD, anything basically talking OAuth or OpenID Connect. We use Zahoot for being able to grab credentials and then perform any kind of actions based off of standard role setups within IAM.
Love it. That's awesome. All right. So when it comes to actually using your platform, what do wallets look like? Because it seems like everywhere I go, everyone has a different wallet.
So that's been one of our biggest pain points of everything with dApps, which might be surprising. You would think that dealing with funds, dealing with smart contracts, all these backend services, different chains, all those things would be the hard part. Turns out one of the biggest recurring problems we have is simple wallet connections. It's better in the Ethereum world, pretty good in the Solana world. We've seen lots of pain points in other ecosystems as well, though, and primarily in other ecosystems. That is one of the primary things we've been trying to avoid when building Kolme. We want to keep the ability for a user to secure their account using their existing wallets, but we also want the ability to bypass that kind of wallet process for normal day-to-day operations within Kolme. The mental model that we're keeping here is that a user already has a wallet. That's where they want to be able to secure their funds. Once they transfer the funds into Kolme, we're now in Kolme world, and we're following Kolme security parameters. The way that we do this within Kolme is you use your originating wallet, whether that's MetaMask, Phantom, whatever else. You use that to sign a transaction against the bridge contract, indicating a public key. The public key is an ephemeral key. It's tied to your current browser session. We store that securely within your browser, or the private key gets stored securely in your browser. And from that point out, all transactions within the Kolme chain itself are signed only with that key. The only time you have to go back to your originating wallet is if you change to a different browser and need to re-authenticate, or if you need to re-up and add in more funds from the external chain.
Let's say you have your application on Kolme. Let's say you're running everything on your own blockchain. Does the end user have to know if, let's say, you are bridged over to somewhere like, let's say another EVM chain? Do they actually have to know where the application is based, or can they just operate normally as if they were in another environment and not have to worry about, hey, this is where this thing is actually deployed?
We recommend to our customers to make things as clear in the web app as possible about what's going on. At the end of the day, we can't really control it. If someone wants to use Kolme and they want to lie to their users and pretend like the funds are going somewhere else, there's nothing we can really do about that at the Kolme level. But within Kolme, my recommendation would be transparent to the user. You're taking your funds, you're putting them in a bridge contract, you're moving them over to the Kolme chain, and they will be managed by the Kolme chain going forward. Once they're over there, transparency in the other direction, we don't really want the user to be thinking about these things. The good old days of Web 2 applications, users didn't really think. In fact, users very rarely knew, is this running in AWS? Is it on bare metal? Is it some server out of some guy's basement? Who knows? Who cares? As long as the thing works, it works. That's the experience we're trying to give with Kolme. It doesn't really matter who's hosting the Kolme application. It doesn't really matter that it's a Kolme application at all. It makes a lot of difference to us as the developers. It makes a lot of difference, hopefully, to founders of companies, because they're going to get their product to market faster and quick and safer. But for an end user, the goal is, I don't really know if I'm on a Web 2 product, Web 3 product. I know that I signed something with a wallet, I moved some funds, and from that point onward, I just use the application. And by the way, just as an extreme example, some of the demos that we're putting together and some applications that might be coming out in the future, they don't necessarily even have to be connected to funds and other chains. You can actually use Kolme for building whatever kind of a local application you want to use. For example, if you want to have some kind of cryptographic proof of timestamps when something arrived on chain, you can use Kolme to sign that, and that can be a data source used by others. So there's not really anything inherent to Kolme that says it has to be related to external blockchains and funds. It just so happens that that's the most common use case that exists in Web3 today. But we fully intend Kolme to be available for whatever kinds of applications make sense, where you're looking for some kind of transparency and self-custody.
All right, Michael, anything you think people will be blown away by, anything that they might not be expecting from Kolme, either on, on the build side of things, but also on the user experience side of things?
So on the user experience side of things, I don't want to sell Kolme short, but I don't think so. Because what we're really trying to do is we're really just trying to go back to the way web applications have worked historically. So we're trying to make it a little bit easier, but basically Web 2 levels of capability. The biggest thing that people are probably going to feel a difference about is not having to fight with their wallets as much. Outside of that, everything should just be standard. The big thing that we're expecting people to feel a difference with is the developer experience. Developer experience for Kolme, one of the big things, and I will be getting into this in the Rare Evo and giving a live coding demonstration. It's how quickly you can get a chain up and running, how quickly you can build the application, and the fact that you can you can run all of your application logic from a single executable. That may not sound revolutionary. In most Web3 projects today, what you've got to do is you've got to put the core logic into the smart contract, put the non-core logic elsewhere, and then have this little bit of game of ping pong going back and forth between the two of them. Just because it's a common example that ends up breaking most blockchains, in our demo that we're going to be doing next month, we're going to have an application. It's something in the GameFi space. It'll be a number guessing game, and we're going to keep a leaderboard of who's won the most money. These are the kinds of things that are not actually particularly complicated problems to solve in the Web 2 space. You throw all the data into a database, you do a query, you're done. Oftentimes, these are the kinds of things, depending on what kind of query parameters you want to be able to run, these are the kinds of things that you end up running into some of those gas limit issues all the time in the Web3 space. And I'm looking forward to being able to give this demo. I wrote the stupidest code I possibly could. It could be optimized so much better than the way I did it. But the stupidest version of the code possible, we never have to worry about it running out of gas because there is no gas limit to run into. So that's my defense for being a lazy coder.
Yeah, I have a few contracts from a few years ago where I have a few $1,000s locked in there, and I've tried to withdraw it recently just to check to see what it will look like. $12,000 for me to withdraw about $1,500 because of how crappy the contract was put together and how intensive it is to actually run it. So it is counterproductive for me even to try to withdraw funds based on this smart contract. Is that so? You're basically saying this is something you don't have to worry about on Kolme because those limits are non-existent since you're running the whole chain.
Exactly, and we don't have to worry. If there is an application, since Kolme is always one application, if you have an application which just burns through CPU, well, you've got one person to blame: the people running the chain. So it's the same people running the chain, running the application. They get to take responsibility and decide. Are we going to bump the hardware requirements? Are we going to talk to the validators and get them to bump it? Are we going to optimize this thing and make it actually run in a reasonable amount of time? Obviously, for my demo purposes, I'm saying, screw that. I'm going to use as much CPU as possible. But anytime you want to, you go ahead and you jump in, write a much more efficient query mechanisms, use a proper database, do proper indexing. You can do anything you want at that point and really optimize it. But if you're talking about a team that's trying to get the product to market as quickly as possible, not having to worry about running up against some artificial limit and then running into a gas issue that can never be resolved, that you've got $50,000 to run your transactions to get your money back. Yeah, those are the kinds of things we're trying to avoid.
It seems like right now we're in this phase of everything is timed. Everybody is trying to get their thing out first. That first market, advantage is real, especially in crypto right now. We see that quite often. Does that mean that this will essentially give people that want to deploy quickly that the edge over the competition if they don't have to worry about so many other things that these other companies are worrying about if they're not using Kolme?
Yep, that's what we believe. That's a big part of our premise. We as a company try not to just focus on the engineering side. We try to focus on the entirety of the product, the entirety of the process. We understand that an important part of the product is getting to market quickly, failing fast, making sure that we are discovering as early in the process as possible that we built the wrong thing, we built it on the wrong chain, there are no users, whatever it is that we need to find out, we got to find out quickly. We've unfortunately seen many examples, not our customers, people who end up becoming our customers or trying to. We've seen plenty of examples of companies that have gone 1 year, 2 year down the rabbit hole of building out a product, only to find out it doesn't work so well at the end of the day, and they built the wrong product in the first place. It's very sad when that happens. We really want to be able to accelerate this to getting an MVP out the door. Most applications, we're talking about 2 months to be able to get an MVP out the door, make sure that it works, start testing it with users. And it's always a sad day when you find out that you built the wrong thing and that 2 months was wasted. But I'd much rather waste 2 months for getting that information than 2 years and my entire runway.
All right, I think this is actually going to be a really good clip. So essentially, you're talking about failing fast. People don't tend to think about this a lot, but like the faster you're able to bring things to market, you're talking about lowering costs tremendously here, especially in a world where everything seems to be delayed. Everything seems to be just another week away, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we understand why it's happening. We've seen this happen time and again. The blockchain world introduces a whole bunch of new ways you got to write code. The standards are not well understood. People are still coming up to speed. And software projects in general are always behind schedule. So you're just adding this on top of the existing tech debt that we all know exists in the tech world. We have understood for a long time this is an existential threat to a lot of companies, especially we started as a startup. Many others, we're very familiar with the startup scene. Startups really have to get something out the door quickly, or they're going to fail. And that has always been something that we've focused on. One of the earliest slogans we've had inside FP Block is shipping is a feature too. So we've always believed you got to get the product out the door, ship it to users. Don't sit around and wait for yet another feature. Get it out the door, find out whether it was good, because guess what? That next feature you were waiting on, maybe it wasn't going to make any difference. Maybe you're going to get that feedback immediately that we needed something different instead. So get everything out the door as quickly as you can. Start getting revenue, start getting feedback, whatever it is that you are trying to get at this point, this milestone in the project.
Yeah, I think I'll pop in here real quick. And Michael's spot on with everything he's saying. Is what we see from a user community. If you look at the whole blockchain space, Web3 world right now, the biggest conversation I'm getting into with people when we're out and about is where are the users? We don't have any users coming to this space. The reason we don't have users coming to this space is because a user, we use a term called building for the masses, get grandma and grandpa to be able to use it without too much complexity in their lives. It just works. So with Kolme, what we've done is we've tried to bring the Web2 field back into it. So people can, the developers, the founders, the CEOs, the folks putting these applications together, they can build and focus on building the user experience and not worry about all the infrastructure challenges that we run into Web3 space that creates all these headaches that drive users away. Because if you think about it, we just keep building the same thing in the Web3 space right now for the same group of people that are all Web3 people. And the outside world, which is the billions of users in the planet, and where the real money is starting to settle, with the enterprise folks. I mean, there's $4 trillion in value, quote unquote, in the Web3 world, crypto world. But, where the real money comes is when you get like a Facebook type of play or a Google type of play, where all of a sudden you have hundreds of millions of users hitting your applications, not 20,000. And that's we believe that challenge is because of the wallet issues, of the security issues, of all the things Michael talked about this morning. We're trying to put that in a place where the builder can focus on, and the product development teams and the builders, the developers can focus on, building an application that a user really wants to use, and they don't have to worry about all the nonsense underneath it, and they can do their thing and have a good experience. So that's kind of where we're trying to get to with this. Where's the user? Find the user. Get the user onto the application. I mean, you still build a bad application, but if you build a good application, we see a lot of applications fail because it's a good application. It's just too complex for masses to come on. And if you're not incenting them with, candy from the token grants, they're not going to come. And we want to make the experience nice and easy.
So tokenization, incentivizing users to come onto your platform with tokens is a temporary high that leads to catastrophic outcomes. Is that fair?
Once you quit handing out the token incentives, the users go away. All they want their incentive, they dump it, and then they're gone. They're not there for the application, they're there for the incentive. We're playing this Ponzi game within this space for years. And it manifests into the fraud that you see out there, like the Hatua girl, rug pulls, the Trump stuff, all that. Well, that's what we got to get away from. People don't trust it. So if we bring trust back into the system, into the platforms, the application, people shouldn't care because the application's doing what people want, and then they'll use it. If just like you go to your banking application, if it works, great. If you have a bad experience with your banking application, you're probably going to change banks eventually because you want a good user interface, a good user experience. That's what we're trying to get to.
This might be really fun, Wes, but why is Michael doing this presentation at Rare Evil? What's the not only purpose, but why choose that medium to kind of, reveal this to the world?
I think a couple of reasons. Rare Evo has traditionally been a Cardano event. There's a big push by a group called Midnight to try to consolidate across the base. They have their view of how the world should work together. We don't necessarily subscribe to that view per se. We think it's a good idea that we need to consolidate the space, but we believe that we're in a technology cycle where we're going to see mass extinction within this space, in my opinion. I think within 3 to 5 years, the names of companies or protocols that we deal with today out there will not exist. They will go away because somebody's going to come with a better solution, maybe Kolme, maybe not, maybe a stepping stone, but somebody's going to come out with a better solution that eliminates all the stuff that we've been dealing with for the last 5-6 years. And a lot of these players will just disappear. I mean, if you go back to the days of AOL and the first web browsers and stuff like that, think about how things have changed. You all of a sudden got a really good Safari web browser or a really good Firefox, and everybody just went there and didn't go to the individual companies' web browsers. So we're kind of in that cycle, and I think we're seeing it. So Rare Evo is the reason we're coming to it. I know the team over at Rare Evo, I've presented there before. They're recognizing the fact that, not just in DeFi, but GameFi and the ecosystems, no one ecosystem's doing great. If you ask anybody, nobody's doing great. Cardano's not doing great. Near's not doing great. Ethereum level 2s aren't doing great. Ethereum level 1s aren't doing great. Folks like Cosmos and pick another 50 or 60 of them are dying on the vine. And that's because people are getting tired of having to deal with all the things Michael talked about, congestion, gas, DDoS and attacks and things like that, and the complexities of tying your wallets together and all that. If we can get rid of that, the users that we want in the world that actually will spend the money and drive investment will come back and come into the system. Mm-hmm. We went through that novelty stage when the old Gartner hypercycle. We've gone through this hypercycle. We're at the peak. We're coming off, and we're losing interest because it's like, oh, AI's cooler now. Let's go over there, and so you got a lot of people chasing that, trying to bring it into Web3 or mining or whatever. But then you're losing that hyper, so people are losing interest. It's not cool anymore. Everybody assumes Bitcoin is now a commodity, not it's like gold, oil, everything else. But everybody else, if you look at them, they're not tracking with it very well, which tells people have lost interest. And when people lose interest, it's very hard to get it back. It's like the old, I don't know if you remember, like when Coca-Cola came out with their new drink, Coke can or Coke formula. And
they're like, bring it back.
They couldn't bring it. It blew up. Pepsi did the same thing. It blew up. So we can't get too far down that road, or we'll just lose what's a great technology, blockchain, to history. And that's what we don't want to have happen.
Well, with that, talking about so many different chains, so many different L2s and L1s not being as successful as they either expected or wanted to be by this time, what does success look like to you?
Sorry. But I think, like, so just on that, I think what Wes said is entirely correct. And, there's a lot of infrastructure out there that it's infrastructure operating for the sake of being infrastructure that is not really fulfilling the purpose for which it was designed, which is having applications which bring users to it on top. And there's a lot of teams building that are, if you're expecting a team if we look at the token price of all these infrastructure, and essentially the token price is very much tied into the continuous incentives to provide the security for the infrastructure so that it keeps running into the future. Then on top of that, you have teams who are looking to build serious products and invest serious amounts of money into something that they want to last 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, maybe even longer. And I suppose there's probably a hesitancy to build something on top of infrastructure, put forward a significant amount of investment, when ultimately there's a lot of uncertainty about like external dependencies that are outside of your control, if that makes sense. So what Kolme allows people to do is they can say, right, I have a vision. I have a product I want to build. I want to build a sports betting platform. I want to build a Bitcoin lending platform. I want to build, this is my vision. This is the product I want. And they can build it in a way that it's future proof and doesn't rely on the external dependencies of all these different types of infrastructure, or they don't have to overcommit to relying on something that is outside of their control. So it's really giving teams the ability to take back control, to say, this is my product, this is my vision, I'm building it for the user, and I don't have to build with a huge amount of uncertainty as to whether the infrastructure I've specifically built my product around is going to exist in 5, 10 years time. And I think it will just encourage a lot more people to come and build blockchain when they know they have a lot more control over the environment they operate in and are not as dependent on external factors for their sustainability into the future.
And to add on to that, this is a very real world example that we lived through and watched happen. It was sad. Remember the old Terra Luna days? We built an application, a game that was very successful, raised $4 million in the first week in raise, and another $6 or $7 million in royalties in 6 months before Terra Luna blew up. Had a very robust community. I forgot how many hundreds of thousands of folks in there. And Terra Luna collapsed, blew up. That application, that game was dependent on the Terra Luna ecosystem. And we had to come in and immediately transfer, port, move it, rebuild it, and bring it into which we brought into another the Cosmos ecosystem because of the closeness of them. And at the end of the day, it pissed off the community. It pissed off the user base. And guess what? They never really recovered. And it's still out there. It still runs, but it's a hundredth of what it used to be. And that's the reason that's one of the reasons our thesis is that we built Kolme is I will never have to worry about that again. I don't care if Osmosis blows up and quits working tomorrow, or Cosmos, or Near decides to change something, or Thorchain, or Solana does something crazy, or somebody over in Ethereum does something nuts. Okay, fine. I can keep going to whoever I want, wherever I want, and never have to worry about that. I may have a little bit of an issue if I have a wallet connected or a chain connected or a contract connected, but it doesn't put my application and my business out of business. And that's a big thing I think people miss in this space, is they get so dependent and so buttered up to these ecosystems that they're at the dependency of them. And we're trying to eliminate that. We're trying to say, we'll use your ecosystem, but we're not dependent on it. It's not a existential threat to my company being in business on Tuesday if you blow up, because we live through it for our customers.
And that happens right now, even outside of the blockchain space. I think
Mhm.
there's a great number of companies looking to go back on-prem because of security risks, because of everything that's been going on. Perfect example, this literally just happened. I don't know if you guys have seen the news yet in regards to
SharePoint.
SharePoint. Like that's scary, right? Like you're, relying on the largest tech company in the world, Microsoft, to take care of your infrastructure and ensure that files are being, held securely. And all of a sudden, you can't say that anymore. Ultimately, I see it as a net positive for crypto as a whole. But
Mhm.
is this something that people should be paying attention to, going forward? That they should own their data, that they should have access to it, regardless if a company is, going through a cyber attack or not.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you think about it, if you go to enterprise today, if you go to, say, JP Morgan Chase or Bank of America or any large corporation, they do not just run exclusively on Amazon. They don't run exclusively on Azure. They don't run exclusively on Google. They don't run exclusively on their own data centers. They have a hybrid. So they have that failover and that safety net in place where, yeah, they may run on Apple, on AWS, but they also have Azure cloud services. They have a data backup in a data center somewhere on the planet, or a couple of them. So we don't do that in the crypto space today, and that's what we're trying to get to. Is get to a place where you have security, redundancy, and you own your data, you own your security, you own all the factors that will make you successful or fail you as a company with your technology in your control, not somebody else's control.
Hey, Nick, you've been using the platform yourself to build applications and see how it really functions. What has that experience been like for you?
I find it much easier than standard blockchain applications. It's pure Rust. So for me, that just makes it much simpler, and not having to worry about gas fees, not having to worry about just all the upstream aspects, allows you to build an application that can rely on a ledger and a blockchain and normal compute processing and normal data recall. And that's actually quite freeing. And I've enjoyed it a lot.
So you mentioned Rust. Does that mean that Kolme has the same type of, I guess you can call them memory safety features that Rust, kind of empowers the users with?
I can let the architect of the application and the framework speak for that much better than I can.
Did you think about that, Michael? Did you make it happen?
I tried. No, I mean, the fact is, because it's written in Rust, yes, we're getting a lot of the benefits of Rust right out of the box. So we are getting memory safety, we're getting speed, we're getting performance, low memory usage, no garbage collection, all of the great benefits of Rust, plus my personal favorites, the very strong typing and safety guarantees. And in fact, I gave a talk a few months ago demonstrating how you can do much more reliable financial calculations in Rust, just as in backend services. I gave this talk at Rusticon, demonstrating a lot of the safety features in Rust. I definitely believe those are the kinds of things that we can be rolling out to the DeFi space via Kolme and getting a lot of those benefits. We've already been using a lot of those techniques in our DApp development when we're able to write things in Rust. But now, by doing this in Kolme, we're no longer limited to the slightly constricting version of smart contract Rust. Now we have full server-side Rust, and we can use whatever tools and whatever libraries we want.
Yeah, talking about making applications easier, you're essentially allowing, developers to not have to be stuck in a Web3 world. Just use the language as it was intended, as opposed to this little boxes that people are setting up, which says you can or can't do certain things based on, where you're deploying the application, it sounds like.
Correct. Yeah, one of the funniest bugs that I've ever run into was a smart contract. Somebody made some change. Everything was running fine in testing until you got to the on-chain tests, and suddenly it gave a completely inscrutable error message about floating points. Like, what are you talking about? We didn't use any floating points anywhere. And it turns out that there's some weird wonky code path that if you go deep down into some Rust library, it's using a usize. And for whatever reason, the usize ends up touching floating point code. And that breaks the ability to compile to WASM without any floating point. It took us, I don't know how long it took us to figure that one out. It was very non-obvious. And again, it's one of those things, you can look at the tech stack, you can understand why these things came into existence in the first place, and you can also just be glad that you never have to deal with that again.
Your libraries that you might love to use outside of crypto may not work simply because it was not written with that purpose.
Yeah, in the, for example, in the Cosmos ecosystem, I have a lot of experience with Cosmos smart contracts, a lot of the things that Wes had just mentioned. But in the Cosmos ecosystem, there's a standard package called Serdi and Serdi JSON. They have a modified version of Serdi JSON. I think it's Serdi JSON WASM is what it's called. And that is specifically in order to work around some of these limitations. Limitations such as the fact that you can't really use a hash map because you have to have reproducibility, and the hash maps that are in the standard Rust library use a random seed, and those are no longer reproducible. And therefore, you could get different orderings of fields. Actually, I'm only guessing that that's the reason. I know that's part of it. That's at least part of the reason. But that leads to needing completely different code paths, and that means that some of the standard tools or standard approaches I typically like to use with Serdi just don't work when you're in a Cosmos smart contract.
Nick, from your experience, what was different as far as, kind of, I'm going to build X, Y, and Z? Is there a different path that you've had to take, or how, maybe was it easier to kind of get started by, deploying an application on Kolme as far as your experience is concerned? What did that look like?
A lot of what Michael's talked about has been the DeFi space. And a lot of what I've played with Kolme on is more through the back end of games. It's lovely to be able to do pure Rust. And if you have anything where you actually want to exchange for real money, or you have an on and off ramp for it, but everything else you can still do within pure Rust and within the pure blockchain that Kolme offers. And that's quite freeing compared to building in the Web3 world where you have to deal with the blockchain for every transaction or anything else that happens. I don't think it has been nearly as exposed as what it could be for the different values that it comes with, but hopefully after Rare Evo, a lot more use cases will be understood.
All right, you might not even have an answer to this, but how does Kolme impact netcode for gaming?
I suppose the answer to that is you wouldn't have to deal with it because you can write in pure Rust and not have to deal with those latency challenges that they're probably experiencing through the Web3 world.
Cool. That is a good bite right there.
I would really have to look into the specifics
For sure.
and what it's doing, but just off the top of my head, like why, just to re-emphasize kind of what I said, is you can have all the benefit of blockchain, and you have an off-ramp to all the ecosystems for various payments or however you want to do NFTs or something like that. But you also have pure Rust. And for me, that's the best option available for building anything. And it doesn't limit you in any way. It just enhances the capabilities so that if you want to use blockchain for payments or something else, you can do that. And the connectivity and the implementation is much easier, I think, than having to write the specific very big contracts for each chain. Or if you wanted to have a game support multiple chains, that becomes incredibly complex, right? Now you're writing for Kolme, it becomes the standard, and you can base then any transaction on what you feel the user chain needs the most or where the most activity is. All the things that Michael kind of brought up earlier, fully pertinent. You get to go where the users want it, but you can have capabilities that far exceed what that chain does.
I guess to just expand on netcode when it comes to gaming, maybe Michael, you can speak to this as far as being the architect. How does system handle synchronization between players and servers to ensure that everyone is seeing the same state at any given time?
The short answer is it doesn't do anything along those lines at all. The way the Kolme is set up right now, we are currently following a very simple, linear, single chain approach. We've looked at a number of different approaches to be able to optimize this and parallelize this in the future. But for the moment, we're sticking with this kind of an approach. For synchronization between different machines, the question would come down to, are you storing all of the different interactions on chain as individual blocks? or are you going to have some kind of an off-chain within the same kind of framework, but an off-chain component that has checkpoints with the blockchain? One thing that I haven't mentioned previously, we have no block times in Kolme. A Kolme chain is able to produce blocks at any point that it wants. It's only limited by processing time itself. So you don't have to every 6 seconds produce an empty block, and you also don't have to wait 6 seconds in order for your next block. So if you wanted to go the route of we're going to have every single bit of game data go into an on-chain transaction, the only limiting factor is how fast you're able to do the processing yourself. But on the other hand, given the fact that everything we're talking about is in pure Rust, there is nothing preventing you from having some kind of a backend server that talks over a high performance protocol. Maybe you want to use gRPC, maybe WebSockets if you're talking directly to a browser. Collect that data together into some kind of a backend server and then batch it together and push that data in meaningful chunks into the blockchain. And that's probably the approach I would take for most games. It does of course depend. We spent quite a while doing, back in the Terra days, we did quite a few games. And a lot of the games that we were building were built around limitations of the blockchain. So being able to have turn-based games as opposed to real-time games, all of those things made sense over there. You could continue with those kinds of applications in Kolme without anything intelligent going on. You can just write an application and go. That's actually one of our demo apps is in fact those kinds of games. But if you're looking for something that's going to be a little bit more interactive, a little bit more reactive, definitely the off-chain processing is the approach I'd take.
All right, I got one last question for you, Michael. Just that way we can really hit it home, like right before you get on stage and get people excited about this. Michael, you're going to be covering what Kolme is all about, how it works, and actually build things live at Rare Evo. Who would you want to see this presentation? Who would you encourage to come check out what you guys have built?
This presentation should be very interesting for both founders and for developers. If you're a developer in the dApp space, especially if you've experienced some of the pain points of smart contract development, and even if you haven't and you're interested, what would be an easy, straightforward way to get into dApp development? Come here to the talk, you're going to see a lot of tech topics. And if you're a founder, you've got a product idea, you're curious, is there a better way I could get my application out the door in front of users as quickly as possible? Come hear the talk, come hear some of the advantages of Kolme and see if it's right for you.
You guys are awesome. Y'all knocked this one out of the park.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cool. Awesome.
Thank you, man. Appreciate your time.